1st. So that, well, there's fines. They can be fined up to $1,000. So there's penalties. As of right now, they haven't gone through the process of seizing any land. Land can be seized, though, if after the passage of the law, if you purchase land and you're in violation of the law, then there's a potential for land to be seized. If it's agricultural land that the person owns, that they either purchased prior to July of 2023, or if they, let's say, inherited the land, you're allowed to inherit land, that type of thing, or if it's passed down to you. You can still own the land, providing that you register properly. If you don't abide by this law, purchasing the land can result in you being charged with I believe it's a second-degree misdemeanor. So there is criminal penalty associated with this if you're not abiding by the law. So if you look at the top part of the document there, you'll see that this is basically, it refers to Florida statute section 692-201 to 692-205. It gives you, lets you know basically what that states, that foreign principal is prohibited from purchasing agricultural land or property within 10 miles of a military installation or critical infrastructure facility.
Question.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Other than military, what do they consider?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. There is a list associated with the statute. So we'll kind of go over some of those. Yeah, well, the list that they give, I'm assuming, is not an exhaustive list. They give a list which is of examples. There could be others. The first one would be a chemical manufacturing facility, a refinery, electrical power plants, water treatment facilities, liquid natural gas terminals, telecommunication centers, seaports, airports, and of course, since we are in Florida, spaceports.
Do you think something about Lithia, where the big like cell towers are?
Yeah, I mean that would be considered like a communications, issue. I mean, it's possible. Like I said, this is all fairly new. A lot of the stuff, you can assume is probably going to be litigated at some point in the future.
What would be the steps to determine the piece of land? Let's just say someone was buying out Lithia. Of course, you want to talk about closed.
Yeah, the thing is that the way that when the statute was written, they have it set up so there's different government entities that deal with different. So obviously, if it was agricultural land, you would deal with the Florida Department of Agriculture. The system, I don't know exactly it's all new, like I said. So the statute specifies who you deal with. So for example, if it's on other types of land, it would be the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity, or something to that effect. Figuring out what?
Whatever.
Well, essentially the buy. I mean, it's not like the government has a list of properties that are out there and what's, so it's going to be, ultimately it falls on the buyer. It's the buyer's.
We're not going to be responsible.
No, well, actually the statute specifically exempts from liability, title agents, things like that. So, and from your perspective, you're not really on the hook for it because the statute doesn't specify that at the outset of a transaction that you have to inform a person about this. So basically, I mean, I wouldn't recommend waiting until closing to do it, but ultimately, it's not necessarily your responsibility.
I guess it comes down to, you don't want to wait till closing, but you also don't.
Right.
If you know that
they're within 10 miles, you don't want to ask them the question, oh, are you a part of a foreign principal of the, Republic of China? It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
and
well,
we
that's
don't
the
know,
thing,
we're not experts,
that's
so
the
it's like,
thing,
it
right,
might Go,
right,
and it happens.
yeah.
We're not
Well,
lawyers.
that's the touchy part of it, you know, you don't wanna be accused, right, well, that's one of the routes you could take. Basically, if you're asking everybody, you're not discriminating against. If you're profiling and saying, this person might look like they're from so-and-so or from somewhere, and you only ask them, well, then they have an argument that, maybe you're discriminating. Yeah, well, exactly. Something to that effect. Yeah,
Question.
Yeah.
Are you any of these? And if they say yes or no.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Foreign principals can be a bunch of different things. It can be an individual. It can also be entities. So, corporations, LLCs, partnerships, things that are foreign in nature. So they're incorporated or they're formed in a foreign country. That can be considered a foreign principal.
So it's it's on the contract anyways, and if they read through the contract, they have any
Yeah.
questions on it, say, hey, you probably want to talk to, an attorney.
Yeah,
or
that's-
something like that. I don't.
That's the best way to handle it. Yeah, yeah. Because, I wouldn't go into the area of making decisions like that. Because, like you say, you're an agent, you can present them with the statute, with the facts, here you go, but you can't interpret it for them. So, yeah, I would want to avoid that, or you might want to tell them to consult with an attorney if they're concerned. But ultimately, like I said, the onus is on the purchaser themselves. If they purchase property in violation of the law, they're the ones that are going to be charged, under the criminal statute, and they could end up having the land seized from them. So now of course, there are certain exceptions to the rule. The limited residential exception, which allows them to purchase up to 2 acres of land, providing it's not within 5 miles of a military base. And it has to be a person in that regard. So when it says natural person, that means an actual person. It can't be an entity. And they have to have a current visa that is a visa other than just a tourist visa.
If they're actual citizens, they've been sworn in as citizens, they're no longer.
Oh, if they're citizens, it doesn't apply to American citizens. It doesn't apply to people who are what they refer to as permanent resident aliens, which means you have what, commonly referred to as a green card. So if it doesn't apply to them. So, I mean, you could ask a simple question: are you an American citizen? And if they say they're an American citizen, you can stop it at that. Or are you a permanent resident alien? And which is one of the types of things that a lot of you may go through that process anyway, especially if you're dealing with sellers, because you need to know if they're American citizens or if there's going to be a FIRPTA issue that may come up. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, you guys are not necessarily on the hook, but you don't want to get all the way to a transaction and have, be at the closing table and find out that your purchaser falls into the category of a foreign principal, and then the deal falls apart, at the last minute after you put in all that work. So,
Is this only for agricultural land?
no, it's for any land. Yeah, no, it's for any land. It refers to agricultural land or land or what they call within a certain amount of time of critical infrastructure. So, but when you're dealing with foreign principals from the People's Republic of China, that basically would affect all of Florida. So that they're effectively barred from purchasing land in Florida. Like I said, the government isn't going to go and seize land that people already own, providing that they register within the amount of time that they're supposed to register, which at this point now is passed. So they were given from July 1st, basically up until January 1st to register. So there could be people out there in violation of the law now that may end up being subject to fines and things of that nature. I don't think that they're gonna go seizing land in that regard. My guess is probably just gonna, it could be just an accumulating fine.
Illegal activity or something on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, they could fine them though. I mean, they, they may still, they may get fined. Yeah, so that is one of the, hang on one second. Yeah, so if you look at the definition of foreign principal, it just means, the government or any official of the government of a foreign country of concern, which we named, a political party or member of a political party or any subdivision of a political party in a foreign country or concern, a partnership, association, corporation, organization, or other combination of persons organized under the laws of or having its principal place of business in a foreign country or concern, or a subsidiary of such entity, or any person who is domiciled in a foreign country of concern and is not a citizen or lawful permanent resident of the United States. So those are that's what they mean by foreign principal. There are certain exceptions to those. One of the exceptions is if they are purchasing land that's strictly in, going to be used for diplomatic purposes. So let's say you might get a client from another country who wants to buy land in Tampa, Clearwater, or somewhere because they want to set up a consulate or some type of embassy. That's what they're referring to. So that may come up, probably not very often, but that is one of the exceptions. So if you're approached by somebody from a foreign government and they're looking for land to build a new embassy, don't just discount them because you could still do that. Let's see. There are also exceptions for, let's say, if somebody owns stock in a company, and it's a foreign company. So let's say the person does, they own some stock in a foreign company. They're from a foreign country, but they don't have, like, let's say, a controlling interest in that country, or in that company. There's certain exceptions for that. Let's see. That's the main gist of what we're talking about here. Do you have any, like, questions in particular or anything, or? No questions? Wow, that's interesting. Yeah,
And I apologize, I'm late.
That's okay.
I've already addressed it.
that's okay.
I have some clients from Venezuela.
Uh-huh.
He lives here, but his family lives in Venezuela, and they always want to buy property.
Uh-huh.
So it says Venezuelan regime of Nicolas Maduro. Is that everybody in Venezuela, or is that?
Not necessarily, not necessarily. If people are here on what we touched on is if you're a American citizen or a permanent resident alien, or if you have a visa that's other than a tourist visa. So if you have, like, let's say, a work visa, that type of thing. But that doesn't just exclude them from buying property. They just can't buy property that's within 10 miles of military bases or critical infrastructure. From Venezuela. Yeah, Venezuela is one of those countries, like all the other countries on the list, with the exception of China, where foreign principals can own land. It just has to be not within that certain buffer zone, is what they say, of critical infrastructure. So yeah, so this is, once again, this doesn't exclude everybody from all these countries from purchasing land in Florida. It just excludes them from purchasing land within that buffer zone of military bases and critical infrastructure, with the exception of China. I keep bringing that up because that's basically, that provision in the statute basically excludes principals from the People's Republic of China from basically owning any land in Florida. It's also important to remember that this is not a federal statute. This is only for Florida. So it doesn't apply. I mean, some of you may be agents in other states as well. And if you do business in other states other than Florida, this statute doesn't apply. So They may have similar statutes in that state, but to the best of my knowledge, I think Florida is the only state at the moment that has this type of state statute in place.
You know why they, in China promoting any land versus.
Yeah, I think it had to do with the fact because China was apparently, and I don't know this, I mean, this is just my supposition here on this. You may have seen in the news, or you may have seen that there was large amounts of agricultural land and land near military bases out in the Midwest that China was purchasing. Yeah, so it seemed to be like China was something that they had a little more concern about than the other country. So, that's why they put it in the statute like that, so. Yeah, and then South America, there's lots of areas in South America where they're, so, yeah, so it's, I guess, that was their thinking when they put it into place, so. But, anything else? Any other questions? Anybody? So this is the form that you guys are looking at, this is the form that we have the buyer sign at closing. It basically gives you the basics of the statute and what you need to be careful of. Like I said.
Violation, they result in forfeiture.
Yeah, violations in the sense that if you purchase property after this went into effect, you could be subject to forfeiture of your land. Not so much if you owned the land before the statute went into effect. That is basically an issue of registration and possibly being fined. That's what the statute specifies. Let's see, military bases, of course, that seems fairly self-explanatory. It covers posts, camps, stations, yards. We also mentioned that seaports are also fall into that critical infrastructure, but they could also fall into the military exception as well.
Tampa would be considered a seaport, so if they wanted to buy.
Right.
Land on the water here in Colorado.
Yeah, it could potentially, yeah, if it was, yeah, exactly. So, and of course, military installations, we know there's a big military installation in Tampa as well, so. You just have to be careful of that. Yeah, I don't think, yeah, I mean, this is one of those areas that it would be hard pressed to find a spot right in Tampa that is not within 10 miles of a military base or a critical infrastructure. I mean, everything is kind of all right there, power plants and water supply and all that kind of stuff, so. Yeah, so anybody, any questions, anybody wondering? So, yeah, so in practice, basically, you folks are not really necessarily going to have to deal with this. You don't have to, bring this up. Like I said, there's no law that says you have to disclose this to a buyer up until the point of closing. But I would recommend, not waiting until the last minute. I mean, you could take this form and you can show it to them and say, hey, this form is going to need to be signed at closing by whoever is doing the closing, title company, attorney, or something very similar. You could ask them at the time, will you be able to sign this form? Because it is an affidavit and it has to be notarized. And essentially, if you, lie on this form, you could technically be charged with committing a crime, perjury, that type of thing. So yeah, it is something I would bring up, but it's not something I would go into detail on in the sense that you don't want to interpret the statute for them. Once again, because you're agents, you're not attorneys. So you don't want to interpret the law. Yeah. Right. Well, like I was saying, if there's nothing wrong with asking a person if they're an American citizen or a permanent alien, because that's something that you could do during the course of your business anyway. Because if you're you need to know, of course, that there is the person, if FIRPTA applies, that type of thing. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with showing them this form and saying, I just want to bring this up to you. This is a form now that has to be signed in Florida. It's an affidavit. And we have to have it signed in order to comply with Florida law. And you can give them the form and say, here it is. You don't have to interpret anything for them. You don't have to, go through it with them. You just say, here, form you have to sign. And it's signed by any buyer. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, well, that's one of the things that we mentioned. I mean, if you're, obviously, everybody's trying to avoid being accused of any type of discrimination, nobody wants to be accused of that. But so if you essentially apply it fairly in the sense that you ask everybody, no matter what your view of by looking at them, where they may be from, if you ask everybody, then you're not discriminating against anybody. You're applying the statute fairly to everybody. So those are the things, I wouldn't, like I said, once again, I wouldn't go into too much detail about it. Don't ask, you don't need to probe them on, that type of thing. But a simple, kind of cursory evaluation is I think fair.
Actually brought up this last, I all of a sudden was told I had to have this document signed. I'm like, whoa, who's FIRPTA? I know my clients aren't, what's going on? Like, it threw me off because I
Yeah.
never had it, but it was right after January 1st was closing.
Yeah, now you don't have to have them sign it. It has to be
No.
signed at closing.
Yeah, the title company
Yeah.
had sent it to the client and it wasn't.
Right.
The title company.
Right.
So they sent it directly to the clients and said, read over this, you're gonna have to sign it.
Yeah, I mean, that can be,
Which said break down.
that can be a little shocking if people have, that's why I, suggest that it's something that you bring up earlier on in the process. Because if there is an issue or if there's a question, about whether or not this person complies, when they close, if they're in compliance, then you have time to find out, they can consult with an attorney, you can consult with an attorney, you can consult with your broker, you can investigate a little bit and find out if this is something that's going to apply to them. And that way you're not waiting until the last minute because nobody, wants this to pop up in the middle of a closing because that would be unfortunate. Yes.
Who is considered a permanent resident alien?
So that's like what's generally referred to as a green card. So if you have a green card,
So the regular FIRPTA that we have in our contract about backup withholding and all that stuff, it applies to anybody with a green card?
yeah, this statute does not, this statute doesn't apply to anybody with a green card or an American citizen.
Yeah, green card, my husband's a green card holder, so he pays taxes, he has a social and
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. It's,
So it's kind of treated exactly the same as.
yeah, for
You just can't vote.
purposes of the statute, a person, an American citizen or somebody with a green card is exempt from the statute.
But the regular part that's in our agreement before this thing came out, seller shall inform buyer in writing if the seller is a foreign person.
Well, that's for FIRPTA, that's for
Right,
FIRPTA
so-
issues.
That's
so-
somebody without a green card, that's somebody who.
FIRPTA doesn't apply to
Business here.
people with a green card either. So if you're an American citizen or a permanent resident alien, meaning you have a green card, FIRPTA doesn't apply to you. That's an exemption under
And
FIRPTA
if
too.
you're not a permanent resident alien, then you're somebody who visits, like the Canadians who come down for 6 months.
Yeah,
Is
you
that-
can, right, you can, so FIRPTA would generally apply to somebody that isn't an American citizen and doesn't have a green card. Or there's another way to figure out, there's a sort of a formula to determine how often the person's in the country. I won't go into that now because that's a whole FIRPTA issue, but there's exemptions to FIRPTA. But that particular exemption, does not apply to this statute. Only exemptions, well, I shouldn't say the only exemptions, but it doesn't apply to folks that are American citizens or that have a green card. So if you're having a discussion with your buyer and, you ask them, are you an American citizen? And they say yes, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. So, does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I just never knew in this form who a foreign person was.
Yeah, well, the FERP,
Tell them if you think you might be, then call title and discuss it with them.
yeah, I mean, if they're concerned about FIRPTA withholding and whether or not it applies to them, you know, talk to the title company. The title company may say, well, listen, we don't make that determination. We're gonna put you in contact with our accountant who does handle that, or an accountant, doesn't necessarily mean our accountant. Usually when FIRPTA is involved, there's a form that needs to be filed, which is called an 8288 tax return, essentially. It's a tax return that gets filed at closing. And usually we have an accountant prepare that. We don't prepare it ourselves. We usually have an accountant prepare it. The people can use their own accountant. They can use any accountant that's familiar with FIRPTA, but they prepare the form and then it has to be filed at closing, depending on what the sale price of the property is and whether or not the buyer is going to be using it as their primary residence will determine how much, in fact, needs to be held back, if anything, from the seller's proceeds. And when I say seller's proceeds, that's the way we do it. If you actually look at the FIRPTA statutes and the rules governing FIRPTA, they basically put the onus on the buyer. It's meant to be, yeah, it's meant to be that the buyer is holding back a portion of those proceeds from the seller just in case taxes erode. But in practice, basically what the title companies do, or the attorneys that are handling the closing, they will hold back the seller's proceeds so the buyer doesn't have to actually hold the funds. But the buyer essentially is the one who's actually signing the 8288 return, letting the government know that, hey, I'm purchasing property from a foreign seller, and you know, we're holding back a portion of these funds. And then they have to be sent to the government within 20 days of the closing. The buyers or the sellers prior to that could apply for what's called a tax certificate, which will determine whether or not they actually do owe any taxes, and sometimes that can avoid you from having to hold out anything under FIRPTA. If the property is under $300,000 and the buyers are going to be residing in the property themselves, it's not going to be a rental, it's going to be a primary residence. Technically, the way the statute is written, it just has to be that they are going to occupy the property themselves for at least 50% of the time that it's occupied in the first 2 years that they own the property. So that would mean that if the property sat empty and they were only there for, you know, maybe 5 days out of the next 2 years, FIRPTA, the exemption could still apply because they're only occupying the property themselves or by members of their family. So, so that's a little.
It seems strange that what the buyer does with the property matters in how much tax the seller would owe.
Well, the reason is because the way the statute is written, it puts the burden on the buyer. So they want to be able to find the buyer because they know they might not be able to find the seller.
That's it. So
Yeah.
they don't see the-
So the seller sells the property, the seller leaves the country. They want to have somebody that they can approach if taxes are owed. And unfortunately, it's the buyer.
If your title company doesn't know enough about FIRPTA and they don't do what they're supposed to do, your buyer is liable for all the taxes.
Yeah,
So are we talking we're not talking property taxes, we're talking income tax.
income taxes, yes, exactly. So essentially, it's capital gains taxes that it would be. But
They can get an international tax accountant to do all of the paperwork prior to closing, as long as they know the numbers. And it can just all be done.
yeah, it's not that complicated. It's just it's just a matter of getting the forms prepared and filing them and making sure you do things properly. If it's under 300,000 and the buyer is signing an affidavit stating that they're going to be using the property personally, and it's not going to be, say, a rental property or anything like that, or I shouldn't say that, it can be a rental property as long as that they're still occupying it at least 50% of the time during the next 2 years. So, but they would sign an affidavit, and then you're exempt from having to withhold anything under FIRPTA. If it's over 300,000 up to $1 million, you can reduce the amount that you withhold, normally 15%, but you can reduce that to 10% by having the buyer sign the affidavit stating that they intend to reside there. So there's exceptions, there's exemptions, and there's ways you can alter the amount that you withhold. So, but yes,
Yeah, I was looking at, I'm not gonna go into detail on the statute, but we talked about the penalty for not
Mhm.
registering.
Yeah.
It says here in the statute, it's $1,000
Yeah.
per day.
right. Well, that's what I mean.
Register. So it's not like, oh, it's
Yeah, they're gonna, no, they're gonna
deal.
tack on and it's gonna be in
40 days,
perpetuity.
that's 40 grand.
Yeah,
they
it's
don't
like
pay.
think of it almost like a code violation
Yeah,
where it just kind of keeps compounding. So yeah, so that's,
quite pricey if they.
yes, it can be quite pricey. So that's why, like I said, we're past the stage now where they would have had to register because January 1st was the deadline. So, basically anybody that hasn't registered at this point is now in violation and subject to the $1,000 a day, potentially $1,000 a day.
So with this form, you're just asking, the buyer to sign,
Mhm.
Based upon, you're just taking them for their word. So
Right.
You're not asking for any documentation approved. So what about like a seller with a FIRPTA, as a
Right.
title company asking them, hey, you need to provide me your resident alien card or anything like that to prove that,
Yeah, I mean, generally, this statute specifically, like I said, it doesn't place the burden on the title company or the agent. It places the burden on the buyer themselves. So ultimately, they're responsible. If they violate the statute, if they sign the affidavit and they were, lying, that's on them. They're the ones that are going to be subject to the penalties, criminal penalties, and potentially fines and things like that.
what about in the seller situation on the FIRPTA? Is there any?
Yeah, I mean, generally, the title company or the attorney is going to ask if the person is an American citizen, because we have to get their tax ID numbers. We have to get that anyway when we're doing the closing. So, it's something.
SPE too, so it's usually a question, like when you fill out with your sellers, you go through
Yeah.
all the house stuff, that's the last question. I was
Yeah.
like finishing that one off after like 50 questions. Hey,
Yeah.
by the way, I don't think you
Yeah.
mentioned this yet, but to future have.
Yeah, and it's one of the first
Give
things.
a good laugh.
It's one of the first things that we ask anyway, once we get the file in. It's like part of our little checklist right in the beginning, is the person a foreign seller? And if they are, is FIRPTA going to be an issue? If not, so yeah, so that's like basically all part of our process too. But there's nothing saying that you can't, get the jump on it and be aware of what's going on if you're taking a listing. Because it certainly helps. The more information you have, the better, the closer or the processor, with the title company is probably going to ask you if you happen to know if this person's a foreign seller or not in the beginning when you send the contract and stuff like that. So it doesn't hurt to know. Yes.
Sorry, you might have already explained this, but if FIRPTA applies to all non-US citizens,
Yeah.
what is the list of country of concerns for?
It doesn't apply. FIRPTA is wholly separate from this statute. The list of countries of concerns, FIRPTA is any foreign country. So any foreign national, any foreign citizen that is not an American citizen or a permanent resident alien, FIRPTA could potentially apply to them.
Okay, what is this list particular for?
This is particularly to comply with the statute that was passed that just went into effect in July, which restricts principles from certain what they call countries of concern, that's what the list is, from purchasing property in Florida within 10 miles of military bases or critical infrastructure. So that's what this form is for. FIRPTA, we kind of got off on a tangent. That's a separate issue, but it's I can understand why it's similar because the contract itself references FIRPTA, the FIRPTA issue. But that's kind of separate and apart from this, but so anybody have any other questions on this? Like I say, it's not something that you really, I don't, stay up at night worrying about. It's the onus is really placed on the buyer themselves. The statute says that, this doesn't have to be disclosed even until closing. So, but like I said, it's always good to be proactive. You don't want to have a deal blow up on you at the last second after you put in a lot of work, so. All right, any other questions about complying with the statute? No? Okay. Well, we'll move on to something that is no less exciting. But this is regarding FIRPTA, sort of. It's kind of good that we kind of touched on FIRPTA. This is basically avoiding fraud when it comes to sales. So, and what I mean by fraud is by having somebody pose as a seller and attempt to sell property and be paid money for that when they don't actually own the property. It can happen with any property. It can happen with, home where people are living. It can happen, but the main area of target that the fraudsters seem to target is unimproved land. So vacant land is basically one of their targets. And also they tend to try to target sellers that are either foreign in the sense that they're from another country or they reside in another country, or maybe from out of state. So you can see why that would be a kind of a ripe target for them, because you've got unimproved land, you've got vacant land where nobody lives, and then you've also got a seller who may be an absentee seller, or absentee owner, I should say, because they're either in another country or living in another state. And there's been examples of people that have had vacant land and they show up to the land and there's a house on it, because they haven't seen it in 20 years since they bought it. And some fraudster came along, sold it to some folks, and some folks built a house on it. And so those things can happen. So you want to be careful when you're taking listings from folks that are out of state or out of the country. Not saying that you can't do that, but you want to make sure that you at least question them. Let me rephrase that. What you want to do is make sure that you're dealing with the actual seller. So one of the ways to do that is you want to make sure that you ask for IDs, of course, at least 2 forms of ID. And this is also something that we do as a title company when we're doing closings. You want to basically try and get them to at least have phone conversations with you, possibly even Zoom calls, because fraudsters tend to not want to talk on the phone, or tend to not want to do Zoom calls because they don't want you to see them. So they may tend to avoid phone calls, partially because they may be from a foreign country and they may not speak really good English. So they may want to communicate just through email. So that can be a red flag.
Or WhatsApp. Yeah, the WhatsApp.
Right. Yeah. Anything where they can avoid actual contact with you. That's one of the things. IDs. So you can, if you're dealing with a person that's out of state, you can ask them to send you a copy of their ID. You want to look at the ID, right? Sometimes they're obviously fake, but not always. Sometimes they're really, really good fakes. We have a company that we work with that can actually, verify whether or not the ID is an actual ID. Usually, sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you can tell the picture looks too small. It's not, it's not the right size in the ID, especially if it's a Florida ID. If you're used to seeing Florida IDs because you're in Florida, but sometimes it's an out-of-state ID, and you may have no idea what the out-of-state ID looks like. So in cases like that, we can get it verified through our company that we work with. So that's one of the things.
Any other questions other than asking them ID, because like the only other information we'll know is like the tax mailing address. But
Right.
they may know that.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions. Yeah, and one of the questions that we also ask is, how well do you know the seller? It may be somebody you know. So if it's somebody you know and somebody you've dealt with before, that's obviously one of the ways that we can determine whether or not this is a fraudster. Hopefully, it's not somebody that a fraudster that you just happen to deal with not a good deal with. But also things like the sellers like really in a big rush to close. They're in a big hurry. They don't want to do say like RON, which is remote online notarization. They don't want to do that because then they'd have to be seen by somebody. So they will push to have their own notary do the closing instead of having one of our mobile notaries go out to do the closing. Let's see.
I found that it's very easy when you get a phoning, they want to sign the papers really quick and they don't argue on price at all. You're like, I had one that
Yeah.
was like 200, the lot's probably worth 200 grand. And he's like, all right, great, let's do 150. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah, and they don't
sign the
care.
papers now. And I'm going, this is just getting weirder and
Yeah,
weirder.
another red flag
Like,
can
take
be.
50 grand off, get it sold.
Yeah, another red flag can be, well, they're not concerned about FIRPTA at all. They're like, oh, don't worry about it. We don't care about FIRPTA, because the reason they don't care about FIRPTA is because even if a portion of the proceeds are withheld, they're still making 100% profit on what they do make. So, things like that.
I would say with our procedure that we have, we've got so many vacant.
Yeah. Now, in addition to that stuff, the red flags, the obvious red flags that are going to pop up, we also have different things that we do, sort of secret things that we don't even tell people about, ways to verify people. And the reason we don't tell anybody about it is because we don't want the fraudsters to be tipped off. So it's not like necessarily like we don't trust you folks, but things can get mentioned, it's a selling service to them. You're telling them what the title company does to prevent fraud type of thing, but there's certain things that we don't even tell other people about what we do. So.
This fraudsters are extended.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And they're always getting better, and it used to be, not even all that long ago, 10 years ago, where you'd get that, email from the prince in somewhere out, somewhere who has $10 million and needs to deposit it in your bank account so they could, and they're willing to give you half of it, that type of thing. And it was all in broken English and it never, but it's, those were easy to spot. But now we're in a place where people are much more sophisticated and are, they're doing this on a daily basis, and unfortunately for us in this business is one of their big targets, because we, yes. No. Oh, no, I was gonna say, because we do a lot of, a lot of money gets transferred back and forth, electronically, and transactions occur with, in Florida, especially because we've got a lot of sellers that live in other states and buyers that live in other states. So, used to be, I'm from Connecticut originally, and, it's an attorney state. So basically, whenever you have a closing, you have, attorney representing the buyer, attorney representing the seller. You sit across the table, you shuffle papers back and forth, and everybody signs in one room. It's not so much like that down here, because a lot of times at least one of the parties, either buyer or seller, is out of state. So, so we do a lot of remote online notarization closings, or with mobile notaries and stuff like that. So in that type of situation, you would think it's kind of ripe for the fraudsters to sort of target, because there's just a lot of opportunities to get your foot in the door. So that's why we have to be, vigilant, maybe more than a lot of other states, just because of that fact, because, a lot of our population is just very mobile. We've got snowbirds, we've got people that are, moving down here to Florida. It's one of the, our population is increasing more than most other states. So, there's a lot of moving parts going on. So you just got to kind of be careful.
Yeah, also too, because we had an incident in another office. The agent said that he knew the seller, and we are still going to request a Zoom call with that seller, just because, comes to find out, he didn't know the seller. So he was just trying to get through the transaction, and we're always going to ask them. We're going to go and meet on Zoom. I understand you know your agent, but we need to verify for ourselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're a resource for you guys. So if you guys have questions, or if you think our sort of motto is, if it seems odd, it could be fraud. Doesn't quite rhyme, but almost. But, so if something's odd or something's just, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, this doesn't seem right, you can reach out to us and, we can help you through stuff like that.
When you're.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah,
There's
yeah.
probably some reason for it.
Yeah, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is, So, yes.
I know you guys said you had a bunch of secret technologies, not asking what they are, but I am asking, do you guys meet often about these like new technologies that are coming out? Because as you're telling us this stuff, things are going through my head.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
AI is a huge thing. I'm
Mhm,
seeing these picture service where I can
Yep.
get a new face of whoever I want, basically.
Yeah.
And then I can speak in multiple different languages.
Yeah.
You really have to like watch. them
Yeah,
all.
we're trying
Those
to,
kinds of things are concerning.
yeah,
for
we're
the
always trying to
future.
keep up, yeah.
With, I can be Meg later, I can
Sure,
do
sure.
video, and I can make AI animate it and say all the things I wanna say to make,
Yeah, no, there's always new
You know what I mean? Or
technologies.
buy or sell her house.
Yeah, they're always adapting and improving their technologies, trying to rip people off, so
That's
it's,
the scary part about
yeah,
AI,
well, yeah,
you know,
it
it
is.
has so many cool possibilities, but there's
Mhm.
always gonna be a bad apple that's gonna find a way to turn it into something.
But that's one of the things too, like why with wiring instructions, for example, we always make sure that, when we're giving wiring instructions to potential buyers that are gonna be wiring in funds, that we have our, several layers of safeguard to make sure that there's not, nobody's fraudulently contacting the buyer and giving them, fake wiring instructions to wire funds to, wherever, into their own account, that type of thing, so. But it's a constant struggle. I mean, it's not easy. That's why, you guys are the first line of defense. Because if you guys see something that just looks odd, there's, nobody's gonna yell at you for calling up and questioning. Hey, what is this?
Gave us a new tool this starting January 1st called Forewarn. If you haven't gone through realtors to get it, it's a great way if you start getting that feeling about somebody, or, even before you go meet a buyer you've never met, you can actually
Sure.
look up their information and,
Yeah.
past addresses, if they've got a criminal history at all.
Mhm.
So that's been a way with a couple of these fraud land guys that we've come up with. Like, I actually got a listing from one not too long ago. The guy, it seemed too good to be true, and then it ended up being two other people had already listed with this same fraud guy. We ended up finding the real guy, calling him, informing him. He was very pleased with that, but he
Yeah.
ended up hiring us to sell his land.
Yeah.
Once we verified who he was, over.
Right,
and over
yeah.
and over.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean,
So there's a good spin it into a listing, FYI.
it's kind of a, yeah, I mean, it feels good when you catch somebody that's trying to rip people off, it's.
Well, we couldn't catch the guy.
No, but I mean, when
They
you
just
catch
disappear.
when you're able to stop the transaction and
Yeah.
stop people from,
Mhm.
losing money and that type of thing. So, yeah, and we've had a bunch of circumstances like that. I mean, they're always getting better and always improving their techniques, so we have to, do the same, so.
That was another one David had too, and I mean, this is something maybe you guys.
What's that, the beekeeper?
Yeah, right.
David had one not too long ago where they had the land under contract, but they allowed the buyer to clear the land
Mm,
before closing. And it was like $10,000-$20,000 or something spent to clearing it was a big property.
right,
Come to find out it was very fraudulent and was discovered, they got it all, stopped,
Huh.
but, and maybe you guys can answer that legally,
yeah,
if that seller finds out and comes back to their land and sees that, oh, my forest that I have been growing.
Right.
Gone, who is actually liable?
yeah.
for
Well,
that
I mean,
issue?
it's an issue, yeah. Hard to say for sure. My guess would be that the person that cleared the land would be responsible for it,
I mean,
I
because
mean,
the listing agent, it's not like I allowed it, but
No,
the
but-
seller allowed it, but my
Right.
seller really.
well, in a circumstance like that, everybody's gonna get sued.
Oh, right.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because, yeah, it just because, yeah, whoever may ultimately be on the hook for it may be one of 5, 10 people that got sued as a result of it.
But
But
things are just But I know everybody too, and the reason why we don't usually let people do any modifications to properties before they own them.
Yes, I would recommend against that. I recommend against, pre-closing occupancy or anything like
Because
that.
those guys have good fake IDs.
Yeah, it's not, it's never a good, it's never, I mean, sometimes it's inevitable. Sometimes you have, if you can avoid it, I would avoid it, that type of thing. But, yeah, those are good ways to get into trouble. So, any other questions about anything in particular? I'm happy to elaborate on anything or answer anything. Anybody's, no? Yes, no? All right.
Title, there's a lot of title fraud going on too.
Well, that's the other thing too. Yeah, I mean, you'll hear those commercials on TV and they're trying to scare the wits out of you
Yeah.
about, how easy it is to steal your title, which, I mean, what they say is true. I mean, you could fraudulently, you could forge documents and, record them and things like that, because the clerk's office, although I know they are sort of briefed on what to look for, I mean, ultimately their job is to just record the documents. They're not necessarily there to authenticate the documents. So, yeah, so things slip through. If you're concerned about it and you're concerned about your own property, you can always go to the clerk's website for the county where you are, and you can always see if there's been anything recorded in your name. You could just search by name and you can find your deed. Yeah.
Hillsborough County has a trigger thing where you can sign up and.
Yeah, exactly. That's a new,
notify you if anything
yep,
changes.
yeah, that's a new thing that they put into.
But is that kind of redundant or useless in the
Is that
sense that, like, yeah, they tell you once it's already done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But
well,
now
that's the
it's a
thing, but
Problem, but.
yeah, but here's the thing, nobody can really do anything until something is done.
Okay.
They can't monitor for a deed that is about to be recorded. They can only
Okay.
monitor for it.
Because I know you were about to shop.
Yeah,
with that.
so-
I gotta wait.
So that's the thing. I mean, even these but I mean, the sales, their sales pitches that, they monitor 24/7. So as soon as something comes up, they're gonna see it, which, I may be true. I don't know. But obviously you can't be looking at the property records 24/7. So, so yes, I think in certain circumstances, it's something, it's
Realistic things to do, like every morning.
every day, check your title.
You check your.
Yeah.
401k, you check your title.
Right, exactly.
Every day.
They're getting lines of credit on their.
Well, they're doing all kinds of things. They're
Yeah.
selling them, they're taking mortgages out.
Clearing a line of credit.
Yeah, they're taking mortgages out. They're
Yeah.
doing all kinds of things like that and running away with the money. And then, the first times people have any idea if something happened is they're getting foreclosure, notices from a bank that they know nothing about. So, but, yeah, I'm over in the South Tampa office, like Megan said. So if you guys have questions, yeah,
I like to across the hall.
I know, right?
Yeah, why did
They moved me over to South Tampa.
Oh, you booty now? Remember? Yes, I'm going back a couple years.
You can still.
I don't need one.
And
I have your number on
I
speed
brought
dial.
to you
Yeah.
a divorce document or something, a divorce
Yeah.
document. Where the person's divorced, but she.
Oh, yeah,
can't
we know
find
that.
it
We got it
there.
Yeah.
She again wants to try to get rid of him, but I don't know what we're supposed to do because he's still on the house and we don't know where he is.
Yeah.
He'll be dead for she is at this point.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
he's on a crack bench.
that's the thing. I mean, the only thing you can really do in that circumstance would be for her to get divorced. I mean, she
She's
could,
divorced.
oh, she's divorced.
They got divorced and he went off on like literally a crack bench and she's never seen him.
Oh, but he's still on
But
title.
he's still on title.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So what does she do in that case?
Yeah, that's a good question.
How do you get somebody off the
she-
title? You don't even know where they are.
Was when as part of the divorce agreement, was he meant to be off title to the property, or was he supposed to sign a quitclaim or something, or agree to a sale or something to that effect?
Look at the divorce.
Yeah, I think I sent you the divorce.
Yeah.
I'll have to look at it.
Because something like that, you can,
Because I don't.
you could file a motion with the court and
Yeah.
just say, listen, we can't find this guy. Because the court can record an order that will act as a transfer of the property. Sometimes you see that in the divorce order.
Yeah.
It will say in there, this will act, say this will act as a transfer of the property. And they record it just like a deed. So, it's something that you can request from the court. She could file a motion, that type of thing. But
I was like, I don't even know how to get him.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that it's something that the court would have to do. Yeah, it's something that the court would have to do in that sense.
So I just tell
Um,
the
Well, and
contractor
if
that
it's
we're-
entitled money, they could potentially hold the.
Right, well, that's why I was asking about what the agreement said,
Yeah,
so,
what the divorce
Because,
decree.
again,
Yeah.
years ago.
yeah, no, but if,
It was right around COVID is when I said it, because I was like, oh, great.
yeah, no, I remember, yeah.
We can hurry up and sell it and get rid of it.
I remember that, yeah,
Then she
yeah.
Decided not to, and then she had another boyfriend and now we're trying to do it again.
Yeah. Well, that's one of those situations where,
But now that they're fighting.
Well, thank you guys for coming.
yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. Hopefully it was informative for you.
Happy Monday.
Thanks for,
Go find fraud now.
thanks for all coming out after the Super Bowl. Like I said, I'm impressed.
They always
Friday,
say
Saturday,
they
Sunday,
make-
Monday.
Oh, my God.
It's a red flag when they start going like, send me the paper now.
Yeah.
I don't care what numbers they hold.
Yeah, that's one of the red flags, look for. We want to get this closed yesterday, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Yeah, so I have a company that I do audits on medical device